And thank you, Abigail, for inviting me today to share this little webinar with you. And actually, it's going to be a journey. And today is the first step in that journey itself. Well, first of all, I wanted to welcome everyone to the A-Star Leadership Series that helps you explore many aspects of being a good and effective leader, especially in the context of scientific research and development. It's my honor to be invited by LOD, Rachel and Abigail, to share with you for the next hour some ideas and concepts that I've been sharing in the past with some of you within the A-Star community itself. So it's going to be a little bit of a repeat of some items, but hopefully, you don't get bored, but keep thinking of the questions and you're going to have that opportunity to keep asking questions. Today's topic is no stranger to most of you. It's about leadership through thinking deliberately. And that's one of the things about leaders, and that is leaders are engaged, leaders are employed, or someone becomes a leader because of their ability to think more effectively. In times of crisis, in times of change, in unprecedented times, one of the assets that come in very handy for us is the way that we think, is the way that we process information itself. 90% of our thoughts and decisions are made in a subconscious capacity, as most of you are very familiar and you would have read in many other literature. The powerful space is filled with heuristics, mental models, algorithms that drive our daily outcomes and the way that we actually go about making decisions. Some of these ideas, some of these thoughts may come from a space of fallacy, may be prejudiced, may have dispositions, past disposition, and also in some cases implicit bias that may be challenged, especially during these unprecedented times itself. So my goal today is I hope to share with you some ideas on how you can consider taking charge of your thoughts. Maybe not all your thoughts, but at least you can begin your journey in terms of taking control of your thoughts. And you can commence this whole journey to be more deliberate in the way that you process information and the way that you think further. Well, first of all, please allow me to start and share a little bit in terms of my leadership journey itself. So this is a little bit in terms of my leadership journey. For those who are familiar, please sit with me. For those who are not, well, here's a little bit about it. I just wanted to share with you that I pretty much started off in engineering school, all right, where I actually went to school in Melbourne, Australia, with a university called Swinburne University of Technology. And that happened, let me see, back in 1987. Kind of like reveals a little bit of my age, but I'm sure I'm vulnerable towards that fact. I started off working with a company called Motorola back in 1987, and I continued to be engaged with them till about 1991 in the capacity of engineering. And from there, I moved on and joined another company. I moved on to a hard disk drive company back in 1992. And that's also my very first time, not in 92, but probably towards 99, where I came in contact with A-Star. The faculty that I was engaged with was DSI. I'm not sure how many of you are very familiar with DSI. Fortunately for me, I still have friends working at DSI itself. After that, what happened is I went back to business school. And from business school, I joined another company where I moved out of engineering into marketing and sales back in 2000. And then in 2008, I decided to start off my own business, consulting and coaching, which is what I have been doing for the last 12 years. The key points of this leadership journey are 2 points, which I wanted to share with you a little bit. Just wanted to share that I had to take dramatic steps in the face, especially of uncertainty. when the dot-com bubble burst in 2000. I'm not sure how many of you were really familiar, but that's when, back in 2000, I started off working for a company called Lighthouse. And my first start was, my first going with Lighthouse was to start up an internet-based company in Manila, in the Philippines itself. Unfortunately, due to the bubble burst, we pretty much spent all the money that we got from investors. We closed the company and I returned to Singapore itself. And then the financial crisis hit back in 2008, 2009. Now, my goal during those times of the bubble burst and also the financial crisis was to keep myself focused on things that I could actually control. Why am I talking about this? I think some of you would see some similarities between what happened during the bubble burst, where pretty much it was a bloodbath, and also during the financial crisis, and how people operate, how leaders operate during these uncertain times itself. There are things in periods of uncertainty that we can't control, right? And worrying about these things doesn't do anybody much good. And for me, at that point of time, I did worry a lot. But I also leveraged on my thinking skills a little bit more, and kind of like inched towards using my thinking skills in a different way itself. In fact, worrying for me became a significant detractor. All right, but focusing myself on making progress on the things that I can control gave me the feeling of completion and also success. And it's the same thing I'm asking you. Are you worrying a little bit too much? Because if you're worrying a little bit too much, or the way you think actually takes you to a capacity of just worrying, how is that actually affecting you? Are you being distracted by that worries, or are you focusing on being an effective leader in terms of what you're doing? So what I want to do right now is I would like to actually engage all of you to do a little poll. And I've got this poll set up. Let me see. There you go. I've got a little poll set up on menti.com. If I could ask you to whip out your mobile phones, scan the QR code, and plug in the code number 972299. And if you go in there, there will be a screen that asks you this question. How are you feeling about the end of the circuit breaker? Today is day number 2 of the circuit breaker, the end of circuit breaker. Just trying to figure out, how are you feeling right now? So as you go fill up, or as you share with us in terms of how you're feeling, that's going to appear in the screen just in a little bit. Uh-huh. Okay, I'm not sure if you could see my screen right now. All right, if you can see my screen, let me get some feedback on the chat, on Zoom chat, if you cannot see the screen, the menti.com screen. All right, I'm assuming that you can see the screen, and what you're seeing on the screen is how are you feeling about the end of the circuit breaker. It's interesting. If you look up on menti.com, good stuff. Thank you very much, Kotwai. If you're looking at menti.com, if you're looking at the screen right now, and if you're putting in all those words that are coming out, so remember, the bigger the word, the more popular, the more frequently that it's being typed in. And I'm really delighted to know that most of you are happy, relieved, excited, anxious. I see a little bit of that stress there, but but nevertheless, looking at the fact that most of you are doing well. And thank you very much for supporting as far as this poll is concerned. Now, what I'd like you to do is I'm going to actually launch the next question. All right. And here is the next question that's coming up. All right, let's see, where's my next question? Okay, here's my next question that's coming up. If you go to the next question, I've launched my next question right now. And the next question is basically saying, what level of threat do you think? So we know how you're feeling right now, the end of the circuit breaker. But I wanted to throw this question in there too. The second question, which is up there. How are you? Oops, not how are you feeling? There you are. What level of threat do you think the COVID situation poses today to these different aspects? Maybe to your job prospects, to your stress levels, to your relationships, to your family goals, and to your life goals. So if you can see the screen, or if you're on Menti, can you please put down the responses for these questions? So I'm trying to figure out how you feel right now. Oh, I guess you can't see. If you can't see the screen, or if you can't see this, oh, there you are. I guess now you can see it. Fantastic. Oh, wow. Okay. What level of threat do you think the COVID situation poses today to your stress level? It seems like, even though you're feeling happy, even though you're feeling relieved, right? What you can see from this scale on the overall, the level of threat is still at about 2.5 out of 5. Seems like it. All right. So job prospects, feeling just below. Stress levels are above average. Relationships are below. Family goals are also below. And what do you think about your life goals? Well, that seems to be a little bit above, which seems like, oh, that's high threat. Sorry, I'm sorry. So the ones on the right is high threat, and the scale on the left is low threat. All right, so take note of that. Your stress levels are high threats, and your life goals are also considered as high threat. So why do I share this with you, or why am I asking you this question? Well, for the simplest reason, as most of you are aware, that our brain constantly operates in either a threat state or a reward state. All right, so low threat could actually depict or symbolize an element of less threat as compared to high threat, which is basically something that operates more in your amygdala, or what we call the inner chimp part of your brain itself. But thank you so much for sharing this. And if you want the results of this, I am very much willing to share with you itself. So allow me to switch back to my next screen. There you go. So I want to move on, right? So I want to move on. We're talking about deliberately thinking. And this is my question. My question is, how do we think in times of crisis? And the way I define crisis, COVID is a crisis. Having a moment of unpleasant moment at home, it could also be viewed as somewhat of a crisis. But imagine, guys, just imagine embarking on a research mission to Antarctica, all right? Assuming you're on a research mission in Antarctica, cold wind tugging at your face. Oops. Can you see my slide right now? Abigail is saying she can't see my slide. Okay, give me a minute. I am going to do this again. All right, let me try this again. Okay, All right, guys, there you go. Let me know if you see my slide right now. Chat, I need chat. Okay, good stuff. And you see my slide. Yes, fantastic. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. So my question again, let me go back to the question. Imagine embarking on a research mission in Antarctica. Cold winds tugging at your face as you trek through the snow. Nothing ahead but miles of ice and water. No humans to interact with. No internet service. Just you and flocks of emperor penguins for days at a time. In the beginning, your thoughts come to you like unwieldy birds flying in every direction, right? What do you think would be the likely questions that is going through your mind if you were in this scenario? So if you could go into the chat group and share with us some of your thoughts. Imagine you're a research mission in Antarctica, right? And you don't see anyone at all. The cold winds are blowing, no Wi-Fi, no internet service, and all you see is just penguins day in and day out. What are your thoughts, right? What would your thoughts be when you imagine such a scenario? Thank you, Cecilia. When will I reach the destination? I feel lost. Thank you very much, Lakshmi. I feel lost, bored, lonely. I see a lot of that word lonely coming out. Andrew doesn't like it. It's cold. I agree with you, Andrew. How will I survive in this weather? Aimless. How to stay alive? How long more? Did I make a mistake coming here? You know, that's amazing. That's amazing that I'm reading all these comments. And if you go into the chat group, you can continue to read these comments. But imagine I'm talking to a group of scientists and researchers. And I said up front, imagine embarking on a research mission to Antarctica. So even though it's a research mission, you know, the fact is, are you actually considering what you're supposed to do as far as the research mission is concerned? Or are you more worried about a lot of other things, right? Yvonne says, well, why is this happening? I like what Nanji says. How do you make friends with penguins, right? So it's a very interesting thing. Or how do you adapt? Thank you, KM. Or how do you adapt to the scenario? And that's exactly what happens to your brain when you are exposed to situations which are not along the norms of how you think, right? And that's a really important thing that I want you to think about. I want to share with you something else. Thank you very much for all that input, guys. I really appreciate that. But I just wanted to share with you how your brains think and how your brains kind of like unlock from rationality and probably move to a level of irrationality itself. As most of you are very familiar, we are thinking emotional beings, right? And it's estimated that the human brain processes anywhere between 12,000 to 50,000 thoughts per day. Other estimates average around 70,000 thoughts a day. That's the amount of thoughts that we entertain on a daily basis. The mind is always buzzing about something, guys. Your mind is always buzzing about something. Right now, you're listening to this webinar. You could be thinking of many other things that you would need to do after this webinar itself. And unfortunately, most of the thoughts are repetitive. All right, let me tell you that. Most of your thoughts are repetitive and they're probably dwelling in the past, fearful of the future, or simply just utter noise that's transmitting through your head itself. How many of these thoughts do you think you are aware of? Most of the repetitive thoughts are on what I call automatic, all right? Programmed into your subconscious mind. And if you recall, I said this, 90% of the decisions that you make are actually launched from your subconscious mind. The sheer number of thoughts and the incredible power of the subconscious mind make you wonder if you are ever in control, doesn't it? Can you control your thoughts? That's what I ask myself too. And do you need to control your thoughts? That's what I ask myself too, right? It's not that can I control my thoughts, but do I want to control my thoughts? I don't think we need to control our thoughts. That's my humble opinion. But we need to decipher them. We need to filter them. We need to evaluate them and create what I call a mental gate, so negativity doesn't seep into our subconscious based on previous thought patterns and also experiences, right? So what I would like to do is, the context of thinking. I want to share with you a little bit on the context of thinking as we are moving closer towards what I mean by deliberate thinking. A couple of things that I want to tell you. Number one, I would like to say that thinking is an inside job. All right. What does the inside job mean? Well, it's thoughts which are generated and initiated in our brain. Sometimes thoughts are triggered based on what others may say. Excuse me. And this may have a significant impact from our past experiences with an individual or even others whom we have engaged with. It may be a recurrence of a situation that is totally independent from the current situation. When these thoughts arise, we own it, and we should explore it before choosing to adopt the thought itself. And that's what it means by inside job, because we own these thoughts. The thoughts that are flying through our head, whatever that goes through our head, are thoughts that we have a responsibility or we have control over, or we decide whether we want to engage the thought or we don't want to engage the thought. And that takes training. That takes training over which you can actually become more effective in what you do. The second point that I want to share with you, excuse me, is it's not about answering questions. And I've mentioned this over and over again. It's about questioning answers. It is a mantra that is hardwired for me. So it's not just about me listening to what answers you have, but me evaluating and reflecting on the answers you have and questioning those answers. This requires the need to listen carefully to what others are saying, and then to analyze information free from your own assumptions before embarking on further questions, either for clarification, for validation, or to adopt the thought and to apply it to a problem that you're working on or a situation that you're working on. The third point is clear internal structures of processing information. What that basically means is inherent structures of thinking which are self-designed and self-constructed. It's basically what I call logic, right? And you being in your job role, that's what is really important to you. Is there a logic in what you are thinking? Is there a logic in what others are saying? So we create that logic that is needed so that someone else can, or even us, can understand what we really want to achieve. The last point is leveraging on thinking standards. And I'm going to share with you a little bit on thinking standards a little bit later on in this webinar itself. I want to start off, I wanted to share a story which I'm confident that many of you are aware of. It's nice to share it from a totally different perspective. Roger Bannister was the first person to break the 4-minute mile. For 100 years, people believed that it was not possible to run fast enough to break a 4-minute mile. Even medical journals argued that it was physically impossible because of the strain it would put on a runner's heart. Bannister took upon himself the challenge, as did an American named Wes Santee and also an Australian, John Landy. Bannister finally broke it in 1954. And here's the punchline, guys. Over the next year, 18 people broke the 4-minute mile. So for 100 years, nobody broke the 4-minute mile. And then once one person broke it, 18 others did it. For me, that is a fantastic example of how belief, not just ability, can hold people back. It wasn't that man couldn't run a 4-minute mile. It was that we couldn't imagine ourselves doing it. And what this tells me, this tells me that in periods of uncertainty, failure of imagination and belief can sometimes hold us back. And when I talk about uncertainty, I'm talking about the current times. I'm talking about the end of COVID, right? How are we stopping to think more deliberately? How are we stopping to stretch our thinking a little bit more? And probably pushing ourselves to imagine and evaluate the thoughts that we have so that we can unleash ourselves and move forward. And this is where I want to share with you the whole concept of instinctive and deliberate thinking. Some of you have seen this slide. So we think in two ways. We either think instinctively or we think deliberately. When we think instinctively, what does that mean? Our thoughts could be racing. If you imagine, remember that project that you went to Antarctica on, right? As soon as you are informed you're going to Antarctica, thinking about the cold weather, no people, all penguins, no Wi-Fi, no internet service, what were some of those ideas that went through? I bet you a lot of those thoughts were automatic. I bet you a lot of those thoughts went past really, really quick. Probably you didn't even need any effort to actually think about those thoughts. It happened from a space of unconscious element. And there was no self-awareness to what you were trying to do. So what do I say? I say is what you see is all there is in terms of the thoughts that were racing through your mind. I'm not promoting that instinctive is not an effective way of thinking. We still need instinctive thinking. And why do we need instinctive thinking? Instinctive thinking allows us to assess situations. Instinctive thinking allows us to maybe give quick updates in terms of what we are doing itself. And what I would like to propose and recommend is, we consider how we can look at a process of being deliberate in the way that we think. And again, if you look at the screen, what do I mean by deliberate process? Well, deliberate, so effortful mental activity. That means you are deliberate. You are thinking about what you're doing, right? The other element is it obviously looks at different options. It looks at the different choices. It prioritizes. It gets you to focus. It gets you to reason for yourself. Does this make sense? I would do a test in terms of the inherent structure of logic that exists in the way that I think. It is logical, and also in some case it's skeptical. It's being critical. It's not criticizing it, but it's questioning answers with the aim of validating and maybe even clarifying what you're doing. So what's the role for deliberate? For being in a deliberate space, you're trying to seek out, you're trying to gather, you're trying to draw out information that could be lacking in what you're thinking of doing or the decisions that you're trying to make. And deliberate is the space that you want to be in making decisions. Allow me to give you an example. A typical example is if you were to go to the supermarket that's in the proximity of your home, I presume, and I hope you are just walking there. When you're walking towards the supermarket, we go through pedestrian crossing, all right? And it's ingrained in our brain that when we see a red man, it basically says that we stop, and wait or allow other traffic to pass through. When we see a green man, and then we start walking, right? And this is one example of being instinctive. So let me give you that same scenario at about midnight, and assuming you have a supermarket that's open 24/7. If you're walking to that supermarket at midnight, where you know the amount of traffic is not much, what do you do when you see a red man? Do you still stop? Or do you actually evaluate the situation, look around if there is traffic, before you decide to even dash across? Again, guys, I'm not promoting that you violate traffic rules. But again, this is an example of how you can think a little bit more, or how you can be a little bit more deliberate in what you want to do. And I have to say, in most of these instances, we remain in an instinctive space in the way that we think. There has been a lot of research, both instinctive and deliberate, especially from this author, Daniel Kahneman. And I believe most of you are very familiar, very familiar with his book. And I'm sure some of you have read his book. And he talks about thinking fast and slow. He talks about system 1 and system 2. And system 1 is being that intuitive, and system 2 is being that deliberate. Can a person always be system 1, system 2? It takes training to actually get into the space where you can switch roles between system 1 and system 2. But stay tuned, because I am going to share with you some ideas in terms of how you can actually switch roles. Another way to manage between instinctive and deliberate is to bounce ideas of others around you, where you could propose an idea from a space of system 1, and someone else could ask you questions or evaluate the idea based on a system 2. So that's one way that you can actually validate what someone else is thinking. And probably you have been in the similar position, either with your team members, or even in a space where your supervisors may have attempted to ask you questions. And all this happens for a very good reason, and that is to allow us to look at things from different perspectives, so that we can be more effective in how we manage our day-to-day leadership role at A Star. So, new mindsets, new results. New way of thinking is going to actually help you generate new results itself. And it's not just being instinctive. It's not just looking at what you've done in the past. And I know there's been a lot of conversation to pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. The questions of whether business models still work, the questions whether solutions still work, the questions whether ideas still work. And I think this is where I'm promoting the fact that we probably have to spend a little bit more time thinking about the thoughts that we have in our head and trying to reinvent them, or trying to come up with more effective ideas. So let's move on, and I've got a couple of ways of actually doing this that we can explore. This is one model that I have used extensively in many different situations, and this allows us to evaluate not just our thought, but also the thoughts of others. And I'm going to share with you a 4-step process, or a 4-step framework that you could use to assess either your own thinking or to assess other people's thoughts. First one is what I call observe. Observe is an element of looking at data. Observe is an element of analyzing or looking at the data that you have. So the first step is you observe what you have. Now, how do you observe? You could be observing, you could be seeing, you could be listening, you could be smelling. So using your senses, that is one way for you to draw information, to look at the data that you have. That's one way. Then the second step is once you have all this data, you try to put this data together, you try to make sense with the data that you have. And I guess this is a very, very common approach, especially in the space of research, scientific research, and also development. The third step that you look at is you evaluate. So step number one, I observe, I collect data. Step number two, I interpret the data that I have in front of me. Step number three, I look at evaluating the data that I have with me. I mean, is this data complete? Do I need additional data? How can I actually validate data? Who else can I share this data with? And step number four is making a decision. So in any kind of decision making or in any kind of situation where you need to make a decision, you can, number one, observe or look at the data. Number two, you can try to interpret the data. Number three, you could evaluate data based on what you have. And number four, you can make a decision. So hang on, how would I use this with my team members or even my bosses? Well, if you work for someone, you could pretty much listen. So observation, one element of observation is listening to what people have to say. The second thing is trying to understand from their perspective how they interpret the data. Step number three, you could evaluate it from your perspective. Maybe the data that's given to you is logical, the data that you have is complete, or maybe you want to ask a couple of questions to just test how they are thinking. And then step number four, looking at making a decision. You know, guys, one of the things that I really like about this process is this is also a process of reflection. All right? A process of reflection has got 3 steps. The first step, you think about what you have. The second step is you evaluate what you have. And the third step is you reflect on what you have. And I'll give you a couple of simple questions that you can ask. The thinking process, the first step was thinking. That is your what. What data do you have? What are you looking for? Right? So you could use questions that is associated with what to gather data from either yourself or from others. The second step was to evaluate. You could ask a question, so what? So the first question was what? The second question is, so what? All right, that's great. I have all this data. I have all this information. So what that I have all this information? The third one is reflective. And in the reflective phase, you can ask the question, now what? So you have a simple questioning model. Why am I giving you questions? That's because, if you remember earlier, it's not about answering questions, but it's about questioning answers. So 3 questions: what, so what, and now what? So this is one way that you can actually explore in terms of looking at information or evaluating information. Another one that I want to share with, another model that I like to share with you is this next one, SIDEKICKS. We are going to use elements of SIDEKICKS. Do you know what's a sidekick? For those who know what a sidekick is, could you jump into the chat group and share with us, the rest of us, what is a sidekick? Oops, let me confirm. Mei Ling, are you seeing the latest slides? Okay, mailing is saying the slides are not refreshing. I hope they are refreshing. If they are not mailing, please let me know. Someone who can read minds. I like that, huh, Daryl? Sidekicks are someone who can read mind. Sulin talks about Robin and Batman. That's great. So sidekicks are getting characters who are by your side. And I'm going to tell you what role they have just in a little while. So you're right, sidekicks. You could have sidekicks, people who actually help you with your thoughts. And I'm going to share with you one way that you can actually explore this. Sidekick is a best friend. Thank you so much, Sharon. There you go. A partner in crime. Marcus says that. Ruddy says assist. Thank you very much, guys. But yeah, I'm going back to Sharon's comment. Sidekick is a best friend who is strong where you are weak and will tell you the truth. Thank you so much, Sharon. I'm sure we all have sidekicks. Either that or we grew up with sidekicks when we were at a younger age. So let me tell you how to use sidekicks in being more deliberate in your thinking process. Here are a couple of ideas in terms of sidekicks. How can you use sidekicks? The first thing that you can think about using in terms of your sidekicks is separate your thoughts from yourself. I know the process of thinking becomes slower, but here's the thing. The reason why you might feel uncomfortable is because you are stepping out of your comfort zone. So it's going to make it go slower right now. So separate your thoughts from yourself. When you assign other parties or you assign a sidekick to be the bearer of your thought, you separate yourself from them. So let your sidekick bring the thought to you. You separate yourself from the thought. You realize, all right, you realize that there is a thought. And then you decide the thought that is being presented to you. Here's something that's really powerful. You are not your thoughts. Even though you own your thoughts, you are not your thoughts. And that's why I'm trying to get your sidekick to present that thought to you so that you separate yourself away from the thought. And then you ask yourself this question: what is this thought? So what is this thought? Now what do I do with this thought? All right? So think about how to employ your sidekicks. Your thoughts can come and go, guys, but you are still the same. Unless if you believe in your thoughts. And that's where we have schemas, we have beliefs, we have dispositions that has been ingrained into us from a young age, which actually forms our personality. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with that. So number one, separate your thoughts from yourself. You are not your thoughts. Let your sidekicks present your thoughts to you and you decide whether you want to adopt or you just want to allow the thought to go past. The second idea that I have to share with you is pay more attention and filter your incoming thoughts. I mentioned this much earlier. We have 50 to 70,000 thoughts that we entertain on a daily basis. All right. So let's look at how we can pay more attention and filter incoming thoughts. This is the result of separating yourself from those thoughts. So this separation allows you to stop and decide if you want to believe this thought or you don't want to believe this thought. Whether you want to entertain or you don't want to entertain this thought. Whether you want to adopt or you don't want to adopt the thought. Whether you want to embrace or you don't want to embrace the thought. This can be a huge improvement from the automated programmed response that you constantly engage in. I stopped there for a little while because I want to be sensitive and I want to empathize the fact that, you know, all this is not going to happen overnight, guys. It takes a process. It takes time to build some of this into your own system. But here's the thing, if you don't take action today, you will remain the same Raymond that you are probably for the rest of your life. If you want to make a change, then these are some of the changes that I'm actually recommending. The third point, here's the third point, guys. The third point is to lighten up and don't take your thoughts too seriously. All right. There are some thoughts that probably are not worth to be entertained. There are some thoughts that you may laugh about it, or there are thoughts that you may want to share with others. So the process is a fun exercise of the imagination. So which you're not, excuse me, let me try that again. All right. So when you don't take thoughts too seriously, this is what I mean by a process of fun exercise of creative imagination. So we imagine, all right, as humans, our brain is so powerful that it loves to imagine. We imagine all sorts of things all the time. So why not change your thinking pattern while having fun itself? So these are the three things that you can consider doing as far as your sidekicks are concerned. And there are tons of ideas you can look at, or there are tons of ways in terms of how you can engage your sidekicks so that you can be more deliberate in your thinking process. And the last idea that I'd like to share with you today is this idea of standards. All right. And these standards kind of like helped me, especially in my coaching practice and my consulting practice, to evaluate thoughts that are being thrown at me, or to evaluate thoughts that are within me. All right. So it can be implicit, it could be explicit thoughts. I could actually evaluate them based on what I call these 9 standards. So when a thought comes to me, I ask myself, how clear is this thought? How accurate is this thought? How precise is this thought? How relevant is this thought? How in-depth is the thought, right? So I go through this process. Yes, it takes time, but over time, it becomes second nature in the way that we process our thoughts. Now, here's the thing. You can even use these standards not just for yourself, but you could consider using it for the people that you work with around you. Let me share something that you can also do. You can use these standards even to test, to validate, to clarify thoughts that your supervisor actually throws to you. And you're doing that for the whole purpose of trying to have better understanding, to have clarity, so that you could walk away and do the right things the first time. So there you are. Those were the three things that I wanted to share with you. The first one was the 4-step process, the 4-step mental model of looking at observation, interpretation, evaluation, and decision. And from there, you could actually look at the model of reflection. And how do you reflect? The process of reflection involves thinking, evaluating, and reflecting. And the questions that you can ask: what, so what, and now what? The second option, I was telling you about thinking sidekicks. Find a sidekick who can help you review your ideas. Now, a sidekick can also be a real person, right? That's another thing. So remember, and the other thing is, you are not your thoughts. Okay, that's really important for you to remember. And how you can actually pay more attention to your thoughts and maybe even have fun with your thoughts. And the third thing was to test effectiveness of a thought, probably using some of these standards. You don't have to use all 9 of them. Use the ones that you're familiar with. And I think most of you are already using some of these thoughts unknowingly. Today, you have a framework to go away and to explore and to integrate it, to infuse it into your life itself. The last thing actually I wanted to share with you was, I want to talk a little bit about fake news. All right, I guess all of us are exposed to fake news in some form or another. But before that, let me ask you, if you could go into your chat box and share with me, what is your source of news today? So share with me, what is your source of news today? So type in there. Are you getting CNA? Very good, Daryl. Thank you. Reddit, social media. Ah, I love it. Some of you are saying social media. Some are saying Google, Facebook, through friends. Cecilia said through friends. All right. Thank you very much. I think, and going back to the 4-step process earlier, we said observation, interpretation, evaluation, and deciding. So that observation is really important because our brain is like a sponge, and we absorb information from every possible source itself. One of the things that I've learned to do during the COVID times is I have decided which chat groups I want to belong to and which chat groups I don't want to belong to. I find sometimes that in certain chat groups, I am the policeman for fake news, right? I'm constantly asking the question, is this true or fake? And people will come back to me and tell me, oh, I got it from another friend, hence it's true. All right. So why do we talk about fake news? Well, number one, it's not true. The second thing is it creates anxiety and it creates stress and it triggers the part of the brain which is not deliberate. All right. And all this creates unnecessary issues as far as we are concerned. Now, one of the other things I want to also say, being deliberate takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of energy too, right? Why would you want to use your brain to process information that is not reliable? So yes, I love the idea what I saw, Straits Times, CNA, CNN, and that's exactly what I do. I've now become a Google validator, meaning that every time someone gives me certain news, not every time, but things which are important to me, I go into Google and I try to validate that information. And it's important for me because it allows me to hold my credibility in the way that I actually present information to others. Because I know many people out there rely on me for giving them accurate information itself. Here are a couple of pointers that you can consider in terms of fake news. You're welcome to take a picture of this if you wanted to. So moving on to my next slide. Now, this is my question to you. My question to you is, how do you want to think in times of crisis? Do you want to continue thinking the same way that you're thinking? Or are you going to take just 1% of that and try to adjust it so that you can become more effective in your thinking process? What I like to do at this point of time is I'm going to stop. That's all I have. But what questions do you have related to deliberate thinking in times of crisis? So if you have questions, I invite you to go back to menti.com, same code again. Yeah, same code again, and see if you can put down some questions. I am going to open up that screen and we're going to take questions there. All right, I'm going to put this up and I'm going to share screen. That's my screen. Okay, all right. So I'm sharing screen. Right now, there doesn't seem to be any questions at this point of time. I'm going to see if you don't have questions here, let me have a look in the chat group if there are questions. There are no questions even in the chat group. So please do ask me any questions you want to. Even if you want to come off mute, I am welcome to take your questions off mute. We need the QR code. Okay, Cecilia said we need the QR code. Go to www.menti.com and you can use the code. Oh, Cecilia wants the QR code. Oh, is that for the feedback, Cecilia? Yes, you are going to get the feedback. Okay, all right. I guess you want the Sorry, guys. Let me see. Let me put it up here, and I am going to switch screen, resume sharing. Oh, how deliberate is deliberate? All right, I've got a question here. Let me answer this question, Cecilia, and then I'm going to put the LOD QR code in there, okay? How deliberate is deliberate since it is a crisis and there is no time for deliberation? Well, I totally agree with you that sometimes time is not on your side for deliberation. And I have to say that in a lot of instances, I do get challenged in terms of being deliberate myself. Fortunate for me, I do have friends who help me process my ability to be as deliberate as I want to be. All right. So I use friends. So rather than the techniques I've mentioned, I use friends to basically ask me questions, or I bounce ideas of people in terms of what I want to do. I want to tell you one of the biggest things that's transformed me is the fact that I've been forced to move my business from a face-to-face interaction to actually getting this done on a webinar basis or via Zoom as a platform. Today, 100% of our coaching and our workshops are all online. Now, we had to deliberately transform ourselves to where we are. So finding people to help us be as deliberate as we want to be. There is no standards for being deliberate, and I appreciate that question. I know I'm talking to people in the science field. We want standards, but the standard is you who is the standard yourself. I'm moving to the next question. Next question is, how can we help others think deliberately when we, oh gosh, that's a great question. The only person who's got control over your thoughts is you. The other person has got control over their thoughts. But one of the ways of helping people to think a little bit more deliberately, if you remember context of thinking, it's not about answering questions, it's about questioning answers. So you could ask for permission to ask them questions and allow them to realize it from their own perspective. There are moments that they would refuse to realize it, all right? But asking them questions and finding the appropriate time to ask these questions is very, very important, guys. And one of the things one example I always use, or one scenario that I always use in my workshops at A star is to look at the brain. Are you in a towards state or are you in a away state? If you have amygdala hijack, it's going to be so much more difficult to get a person to be deliberate. You got to have that person in the PFC, in the prefrontal area, prefrontal cortex area. All right. Okay, good stuff. And let me see. Thank you very much for these questions, guys. What I'm going to do is, Cecilia wants, yes, I am going to, okay, there you go. All right, there you go, guys. This is the QR code. I guess you can see it. If you can't see it, please chat in the chat box and let me know that you can't see it. Here's a QR code for you. This is provided by LOD, cannot see. Thank you, Vivian. Let me see. Why can't you see this? Okay, how's that? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, now you should be able to see it. I apologize for that. I'm just switching different screens and I'm still getting used to the Menti question. No. This is the QR code. This is the QR code, not for the Menti questions, but this is the QR code for the feedback for this program. Works now. Thank you very much, Vivian. I appreciate that. Guys, I really appreciate you chatting in the chat box because it's one way for me to actually get feedback from you. All right. So yeah, please scan this code and put down information. If you got more questions, please let LOD know. And then you're welcome to come back and join me. I'm back here again in approximately 1 week, slightly more than 1 week, where I have got another topic, which is kind of like a follow through to thinking, but this time communicating as a leader. My last screen is this. So please, please join me. You can either email me here, raymond@enable.com, or join me on LinkedIn with the email raymond@raymondthomas.com, which is my name itself. Oops, sorry, Abigail. Is this what you want? Q7, yes, there you go. For those who can't scan the QR code, there is a link at the bottom. Can I pass this back to you, Rachel?
Rachel has left because she had something on. So thank you, Raymond, again. He'll be back next week, next Thursday, on the topic effective leadership during a crisis, right, Raymond?
Next week's topic.
Yeah, next Thursday is effective leadership communications during a crisis.
That's right. Thank you, Abigail.
So the recording and the slides will be shared with you all in the EDM next week. So please look out for it, and appreciate if you could complete the feedback form. So if you have no other questions, maybe we can end this session.
Thank you very much, guys, for being here today. Hope to see you again at the next session.